Good morning, good morning. Very warm welcome back to Summit Seashore Birding Adventures and Birds, Poetry and Literature, the series where we dip into the pages of the classics to try and find mentions of birds. And of course, this is followed by reading a bird poem, and then finally I give you a bird book recommendation. Now, just very quickly, not much on the bird front to report other than yesterday I got out with my good friend Nick Tanner. We went out to Staines Reservoir and to Staines Moor. It was a beautiful day. The birding was great. Birds I've mentioned were we had two Great Northern Divers, one on the South Basin and one on the North Basin, and we had two black-necked grebes, one in breeding plumage and one in winter plumage. They were quite close in, but unfortunately the light was lovely, but the light was terrible for photographs, so I didn't get anything of that. And then on Staines Moor we did about 3 mile march around there. We did connect with the short-eared owl, but literally only for a few seconds. It went down on a prey, and we probably waited there nearly 40 minutes and it never got up again, and we had to leave. So but anyway, it was a lovely day out on the moor and we really enjoyed it. So let's get into our book of today. Call Me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery parts of the world. Now, of course, these are the very famous opening lines of Herman Melvilles Moby Dick. And this copy here is one of my Penguin classics. It's a really nice book, soft back, which I enjoy because I can sometimes lay in bed and read it without it being this great big chunk. So Herman Melville, this was published in 1851, and it took him about 18 months to complete it. He had a real experience with this, because he spent the mid 1840s actually out at sea. He started off as a cabin boy heading to Liverpool, but ended up spending 5 years out at sea and was actually part of a whaling crew. So he knew, he was very familiar with the terminology, with the equipment, with the naval expressions and things like that. So he had a real great background to write this classic. Now, it's hard for us nowadays to put ourselves back in his place. It seems so archaic and horrendous to be hunting these incredible creatures, but it was a part of what happened. They killed these whales for their oil. They killed them so that they could have oil for lighting. There was use for candles, for soap, and also even like grease for pistons and things like that. And so it was an industry, and it was fairly horrendous, but it did happen. And his story isn't just this tale, Moby Dick. It's a lot of it is actually from his experience. So it's a tough book, even though I thought I'd read some tough books like the Iliad and Dante, Inferno, Paradise Lost, and all these others. I thought I was equipped, but it was a tough read. I think at one point I felt like putting it down, but I decided to persevere and push through. And the problem with it is, okay, so there's a couple of things. One, it's the content. Obviously, it's a hard subject to read about ethically. obviously the language it's written in, he was really influenced by the King James Bible and William Shakespeare, so it's got that poetic edge to it, and it's also got a very religious slant to it as well. And it's also sometimes difficult because the narrative stops and he ends off going on after chapter after chapter after chapter explaining, the terminology in the rigging, the different types of boats, the different ways to, how they, once they'd got a whale, how they cut the whale up and how they, dressed it. And he talks about the different duties and the factories and the whiteness of the whale. And so there is a lot that takes you away from the rhythm of the narrative, which sort of causes you to sort of lose the flow of the book. But I did persevere, I did push through, and I really, really enjoyed this book. And there are, like I said, some of it, not just the language, but some of the conversations that go on. Some of it's funny, some of it's heartwarming, some of it's distressing, some of it's really uncomfortable. There was, which I'll slightly go into. But the plot of the book is probably, most of you know, is that it is Captain Ahab has lost his leg to Moby Dick, the white whale, which is a sperm whale, and he has a stump now, and he's a very weathered sailor and captain, and it's the story of his revenge against Moby Dick. And of course, as you get into this book, you realise it's not just Ahab trying to kill Moby Dick, it's almost like Ahab trying to kill Ahab. And he renounces everything. He renounces the weather, the words of his shipmates, God. He is almost trying to stand in for God. And but you end, it's a funny roller coaster, this book, because you don't like him, and then you sort of like him, and you can understand where he's coming from, and then he does something that you're really uncomfortable with. So it's a bit of a journey. So it's about his revenge. He's not interested in the crew. He's not interested in on what they want. He's not interested in the boats that they meet along the journey. They want to stop and talk and share because they've been out at sea for so long. All he wants to know is, have you seen the white whale? And that's all he's interested in. So he's very focused with his revenge. And then, of course, it's told through the voice of Ishmael, who has decided to join this crew and go on this epic journey. Now, let me just grab a couple of notes here because I can't remember it all. So the crew is there's a lot of crew there, and it's one of the things is that I suppose scholars have dissect these books afterwards and sort of think of it as it being this micro representation of the US, because it is this small ship, but it's got all these different people from different ethnic backgrounds on it, and showing how this community can work together to see this through. And some of I'll just name a few of you've got the main crew, so you've got Starbuck, Stubb and Flask. Starbuck I really like. He's not afraid of Ahab. He's wary of him, but he's also got his own voice, and he'll give his opinion, and Ahab doesn't always listen, but later on he takes it on board. And I think Ahab has a respect for Starbuck because he does stand up for his principles. And he also genuinely cares about Ahab, and he's trying to, convince him that what they're doing is going to get them all killed. Stubb is, there's a really uncomfortable conversation with Stubb and the cook Fleece, who is a Negro, and first of all, it's quite funny, the conversation, because he's trying to tell Fleece to shout at the sharks for, stop biting the whale that's tied to the side of the ship, and the way Fleece goes about it is really funny. And then it gets really uncomfortable with the way that Stubb is addressing Fleece and talking to him, and it made me genuinely uncomfortable. I didn't like it. But then it's funny again, because this old Fleece, he's heard it all before, and he's a strong character, and he just, some of the comments he comes back with under his breath to Stubb is hilarious. So there's ups and downs and a bit of a roller coaster. You've got the harpooners, Queequeg, Tashtigo and Fedler. Queequeg befriends Ishmael at the beginning, and you can read about that if you're interested. It's quite a funny story how they join together as a friendship, and Queequeg basically says he'll die for Ishmael. They've become almost married, but not in the sense of man and woman. It's like this brotherhood bond sort of thing, and a very interesting character. And also we've got Pip, who is the young shipkeeper. He's a young Negro boy, and he is just meant to stay on the ship, but he eventually goes on one of the trips and falls overboard, and it really affects him mentally, and you hear him saying crazy stuff. But actually, one of the nice things is that Captain Ahab then takes Pip sort of under his wing and makes sure he's okay and looks after him. So the journey starts off on the east coast of the States, and basically it's from Nantucket east to the Azores, then south past Cape Verde down to the mid southern America, east to St Helena. Obviously St Helena is where Napoleon was put after the Battle of Waterloo, and where he died, around the Cape of Good Hope northeast, basically through the Wallace Line, and up to Japan, and then south east near to the equator, and south of Hawaii, where the ship finally goes down and Ishmael is left and is rescued by a ship called the Rachel, who they had previously met, and who had lost some of their crew and had asked for help, but Ahab refused to help them, and yet it was that ship that eventually saves Ishmael. So, sorry for the spoilers. I should have said at the beginning, don't watch this if you haven't read Moby Dick, but I'm sure most of you really do know this story. So I think that's the ship itself is called the Pequod, that they're on board, and of course the distance they travel, as I've explained, is quite a long distance, but it's a long distance in terms of the morality and the drive and the obsession that you find within this book. So that's all I'm going to cover really on the book. I know I haven't really gone into the whole story, but I think you get the general idea. And now I would like to get into some of the bird examples that I found within this. Now, this was a gold mine. You can imagine through that route the incredible birds they must have seen. Of course, they don't know all the names of the birds, but there's a lot of references. I think I found references in something like over 40 chapters, and some multiple references. And so I've decided that I'm going to choose 7 of the references that I found to highlight what I sort of consider my best finds in terms of birds within the book. But I'll just skim through a couple of the other ones very quickly, very briefly. Even when they mention things like early bird, or wounded winged or something like that, I pick up that and I make note of it, because I'm trying to find all references to birds in there. Skylarking, which is an old naval term for just goofing around, goofing off sort of thing, was mentioned 2 or 3 times. There was a reference to prairie cocks, which are, like grouse out on the prairies. And gulls, crow nest, obviously, because of it being a ship. Antarctic fowl. I'm not sure. It could have been one of the white, the real laysan or wandering albatross. I'm not sure, but a very white, giant albatross. There's a reference to flight of swallows, and this is where Ahab knew the movement, the migration of these sperm whales. He knew them through the calendar year, and he was sort of bringing it to mind, the flight of swallows. So he knew the spring or the autumn movement of these birds, and that was used to explain how he knew the movement and where to be in the right place at the right time to catch up with these sperm whales. Vulture, a hen's brood was mentioned. What else have we got? Ostrich is mentioned in the book. Sea fowls, geese are mentioned, screaming fowls, sea vultures, and you've got to try and interpret what all of are they gulls, are they noddies, are they terns, are they cormorants? So you sort of have to guess that. One of the references, man of war, which is another name for the frigate bird, so I'm pretty sure on that one. There was mention of a red-beaked bird with long tail streamers. Now for me, especially when they're talking about going over to St Helena, and Ascension isn't that far, and I've been to Ascension and seen the red tropic birds. Of course, they've got these long tail streamers and red bills, so I'm presuming that's what they might be referring to. What else have we got? More like sea fowls. There was a mention of a land bird. Heron is mentioned when they're referring to Ahab's leg, like how he walks and heron-like. Another one was soft-toed fowls was mentioned, and that to me screams storm petrels of some description. The way they patter when they fly across the sea, they sort of patter on the water. Hawk's beak was mentioned, and skyhawks. So different references of fowls and vultures and hawks, and you get the feeling that these could cover a multitude of different types of seabirds. Okay, the first example comes on very early in the book, and it's Ishmael thinking about his duties on the boat, and he was thinking about if he was a cook. And as far as going as cook, though I confess there is considerable glory in that, a cook being a sort of officer on shipboard, yet somehow I never fancied broiling fowls. Though once broiled, judiciously buttered, and judgmatically salted and peppered, there is no one who will speak more respectfully, not to say reverently, of a boiled fowl than I will. It is of the idolatrous dotings of the Egyptians upon broiled ibis and the roasted river horse that you see the mummies of those creatures in huge bakehouses, the pyramids. Of course, there were thousands and thousands of ibis found mummified. Why they chose that bird, I'm not sure, but it was obviously an offering to the gods. In this part, Ishmael is with Quigeg, and he has an idol that he prays to, this small idol. And these last words about what he was doing, praying to this idol, and also what he did with it in the end. All these strange antics were accompanied by still stranger guttural noises from the devotee, who seemed to be praying in a sing-song, or else singing some pagan psalmody or other, during which his face twitched about in the most unnatural manner. At last, extinguishing the fire, he took the idol up and very unceremoniously and bagged it again into his grego pocket, as carelessly as if he were a sportsman bagging a dead woodcock. And you can imagine the old fowlers doing that, and a great reference there to woodcock. In this part he's talking about the influence of literature, learning about whales, and so very quickly, thus speak of the whale, the great Cuvier and John Hunter, and Lesson, those lights of zoology and anatomy. Nevertheless, though of real knowledge there be little, yet of books there are a plenty, and so in some small degree with cetology, or the science of whales, many of the men, small and great, old and new, landsmen and seamen, who have at large or in little written of the whale. And of course some of these include sections in the Bible, Aristotle, Pliny, Aldrovandi, Gesner, Sir Thomas Browne, Carl Linnaeus, and the greatest find for me, thinking back on the work that I did with Birding Wisdom, was references to John Ray and Francis Willoughby, which I was really happy to find. In this particular chapter, chapter 42, the whiteness of the whale, the elusive quality it is which causes the thought of whiteness when divorced from more kindly associations and coupled with any object terrible in itself, to heighten that terror to furthest bounds. Whiteness, the white bear of the poles and the white shark of the tropics. What but their smooth flaky whiteness makes them transcendent horrors they are? The ghastly whiteness it is which imparts such an abhorrent mildness, even more loathsome than terrific, to the dumb gloating of their aspect, so that not the fierce fanged tiger in the heraldic coat can so stagger courage as the white-shouldered bear or shark. Bethink thee of the albatross, whence come those clouds of spiritual wonderment and pale dread, in which the white phantom sails in all imaginations. Not Coleridge first threw that spell, but God's great unflattering laureate, nature. And of course, great reference to the albatross and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and I'm going to touch on him in a little while. In this little section here, they talk about some birds that land on the boat. Close to our bows, strange forms in the water darted hither and thither before us, while thick in our rear flew the inscrutable sea ravens. And every morning perched on our stays rows of these birds were seen, and spite of their hootings for a long time obstinately clung to the hemp, as though they deemed our ship some drifting uninhabited craft, a thing appointed to desolation, and therefore fit for roosting place for their homeless selves. And heaved, still unrestingly heaved the black sea, as if its vast tides were a conscience, and great mundane soul were in anguish and remorse for the long sin and suffering it had bred. Now, these sea ravens, initially I thought, I wonder if they mean like something like black noddies, because they could be mistakenly looked at as sort of jackdaws or something like that. But I did look up this. I tried to find some more information on this, and they believe that they're sort of referring probably to something like a cormorant that lands on the ship and spreads its wings and preens and things like that. So I think that's the reference to sea ravens. Okay, so finally, this last little bit that I want to read you, it was one of my absolute favourite things to find. It's ridiculous. Yeah, I know how these things just bring so much happiness. But that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find these odd things in these classics to bring to mind. And this chapter 113 is called The Forge, and it's where Captain Ahab is having a harpoon made by the forger, the farrier. And it goes a little bit like this. With matted beard and swathed in bristling sharkskin apron, about midday Perth was standing between his forge and anvil, the latter placed upon an iron wood log, with one hand holding a pike head in the coals and with the other at his forger's lungs, when Captain Ahab came along, carrying in his hand a small rusty-looking leather bag. While yet a little distance from the forge, moody Ahab paused, till at last Perth, withdrawing his iron from the fire, began hammering it upon the anvil, the red mass sending off sparks in thick hovering flights, some of which flew close to Ahab. "Are these thy mother Carey's chickens, Perth? They are always flying in the wake, birds of good omen, too, but not to all. Look, here they burn, but thou livest among them without scorch." "Because I am scorched all over, Captain Ahab," answered Perth, resting for a moment on his hammer. "I am past scorching. Not easily canst thou scorch a scar." Okay, so the part in this which is really important is the line, "Are these thy mother Carey's chickens?" And of course that is a very old name for storm petrels. And I was over the moon to find that, and I thought it was just a fantastic little section of the book, referring to them, to the Mother Carey's chickens, to these flying sparks that were coming off. That's it for my bird references, and I struggled, but I loved this book, and I loved all the references that I found to it. Now, moving on to our poem, the most obvious poem to be paired with this book is, of course, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. And I've got a copy of William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge's lyrical ballads, and the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is the first poem of the book. Now, it's a very, very long poem, so I won't be reading it all, but it starts off, "It is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three, by thy long grey beard and thy glittering eye. Now wherefore stoppest me?" And of course it's the ancient mariner stopping one of the men who are going off to the wedding, and he, for whatever reason, he chooses someone to tell this tale to because of what he's learnt and wants to pass on that information. And of course there's also a very famous couple of lines in here that most of us would have heard of. "Water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nay, any drop to drink." Now, the particular part of this poem I just wanted to bring to your attention, of course you can look this up online and read the whole thing, or you can, I'm sure there's YouTube videos that you can hear it read aloud. "The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and rolled and howled like noises of a swound. At length did cross an albatross, through the fog it came, and in it were a Christian soul, we held it in God's name. Then mariners gave it biscuit worms, and round it flew. The ice did split, with thunder fit, the helmsman steered us through. And as good south winds sprung up behind, the albatross did follow, and every day, for good or play, came the mariner hollow. In mist or cloud, on mast or shroud, it perched for vespers 9, while all the night through fog smoke white glimmered the white moon shine. God save thee, ancient mariner, from the fiends that plague thee thus. Why lookest thou so? With my crossbow I shot the albatross. And of course, a very famous poem and story of the weight of that albatross around his neck through his whole voyage until eventually it falls off, and that's him carrying the worry and the guilt of his decisions, and finally it falling from him when he has made amends with himself, with God, or with his fellow man. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Okay, so finally I'm just going to come to book recommendation time, and actually I've got because of reading Moby Dick and because of its association with all the seabirds that I'm talking about, I've got actually 3 here, and I'm just going to go through them very quickly with you as great books to have. So the first is the new naturalist series Seabirds by James Fisher, who was obviously at one time the authority on seabirds, and this is a brilliant reference book. Some wonderful, fantastic photographs in there to look at, and just a great part of our history, and having it as a reference to what they learnt back during those early days. The second one is Carl Safina's Eye of the Albatross, and it's really about I read this about 20 years ago. This is really about a Laysan albatross on the Hawaiian archipelago called Amelia, and following her and her story, and of course it involves lots of different other things, the atolls out of there, tiger sharks and all sorts, but it's just a wonderful, wonderful book. And like I say, I mean, it's been 20 years since I read that, but I still remember it and the feeling of reading that, and so I would highly recommend that. And finally, which I read probably about maybe 6 months ago, is Adam Nicholson's The Seabird's Cry, and this is just fantastic, and each chapter is broken down into each seabird, and there's some great drawings and stories of how these birds have been tracked and what we've learnt from them over the years, and his writing is phenomenal. And in fact, there's some really good YouTube videos. If you look up Adam Nicholson, there's a great one with him with Professor Birkhead, actually, and the conversations going on between the two of them. One is a sort of a writer and an academic in terms of literature, and then him and Tim sort of go back and forth with conversations. And it's fascinating to watch. This book is incredible, and I really highly recommend it. So finally, we're getting to that point where we're going to be thinking about what book I'm going to be looking at next in birds, poetry and literature, and I've got a few to choose from, but I've decided to go for this, and this is The Hound of the Baskervilles, course, about Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle, and I love this book. I really enjoyed it, and it's I'm not sure what the series is called, but they've got this wonderful Penguin Classics. They've got this lovely, all of them are like this. My War of the World one is like this as well, and they're a lovely size. Text is wonderful and just beautifully put together. So we'll be looking at that on the next video. I do have plans. I'm not sure when they're going to come to fruition, because I'm trying to get through these. I'm enjoying doing this research, and who knows, maybe one day I'll write some of this down and put it out in a book. But for now, I'm still enjoying it. But I have an idea of a different episodes probably going to come up around the springtime, looking at specific species, like one particular bird, and how I then look at that bird, and not only in the field and talk about it out in the field, but also how I like to do my research and learn more about that particular species. So hopefully that will be enjoyable for you. Anyway, until next time, happy birding, and I'll see you in the field.